Hello, everybody, and happy Black History Month. Thank you for attending the UC Tech Assembly Black Leaders Panel. This panel launches the UC Tech Assembly series, which is expanding the former Town Hall series to better amplify the voices of UC Tech community members. Now I'll introduce our panelists. Sharon Andrus received her bachelor's in organizational leadership from Biola University and her master's in gerontology from USC. She's been with UC for 9 years, serving at both the Davis and Berkeley campuses. Currently, she oversees the Information Security Office at UC Berkeley as their Associate Chief Information Security Officer. Al Covington was born, raised, and educated in the Midwest, earning a bachelor's degree in HR management from Central Michigan University and a master's degree in HR and industrial relations from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Al is currently Divisional Manager of Human Resources and Information Technology Services at UC Santa Cruz, and he's been in various HR roles at UC Santa Cruz since 2014. He's also Treasurer-elect of UC Santa Cruz's Staff Advisory Board. Dr. Carmen Robinson earned her Doctor of Education at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock. Prior to that, she earned a master's at the University of Memphis and a bachelor's at the University of Central Arkansas. Dr. Robinson is the first Program Director for Student Excellence, Engagement, and Inclusion at the UC Santa Cruz Baskin School of Engineering in 2020. Dr. Robinson has also served as the school's Director of Undergraduate Affairs since 2017. Van Williams is Vice President of Information Technology Services and Chief Information Officer for the University of California. He has an MBA in Finance, Entrepreneurship, and Marketing from Stern, and a bachelor's degree from NYU, where he majored in Classical Civilization and minored in Chemistry. As CIO, Van serves as the university's Chief IT Leader and Strategist, collaborating with campus and health CIOs and other leaders across the UC system. He also oversees IT-related strategic priorities for the UC Office of the President. Thank you to our panelists for joining us today. We'll reserve a few minutes at the end to take questions. Please submit your questions using the Zoom Q&A function. Now on to the questions. First, tell us about your professional background and how you ended up involved in tech. And that's to everyone. Who wants to get started?
I'll jump in since I think I have one of the most non-tech positions on the call, but as you mentioned, and thank you for the great introduction, Janae. I'm the divisional HR manager for IT services on the Santa Cruz campus. So I'm not a software engineer or something like that, but I support all of the IT professionals on our campus. And so it was, as you mentioned, various roles throughout my time. But all HR roles, first for our central staff human resources, then for our university relations, our advancement professionals, and then finally now supporting IT services, one of the larger divisions on our campus. So it made sense for me to join ITS.
I have a fairly, I think, non-traditional background. I'm a gerontologist by training with a specialization in pharmacology. And so I just knew that I was going to work in pharmacy and in healthcare. However, my mother is a programmer and has worked in IT since I was a teenager. And so she always kind of was pushing technology on myself and my sister, making sure we knew how to code and different things like that. And so when I got my first job out of college, I was working for a pharmacy benefit management company, and they had some need for tech liaisons, some on-the-spot coding. And because I had experience through my mother, I found that I became the go-to. And so even though I didn't have an IT job, I kept being the person that they would call and that they would engage with when they needed tech work. And so I continued to do that through several different jobs in healthcare, where I would always be kind of the tech in my department. And so finally I decided in 2012, why don't I just go ahead and work in IT instead of being IT adjacent? And that's when I was recruited by UC Davis Health to come and work for them as part of their EPIC implementation. And that is how I made my way officially into the tech world, but have been doing it kind of what we all kind of say is shadow IT for many years before that.
Yeah, so, because it's Black History Month, I just want to say I grew up in the Bahamas, and 80%, 85% of the population there is Black. So like almost every face that I kind of saw for most of my formative years was actually Black. And then I moved here as a teenager. And, unfortunately, kind of growing up in the islands, everything that I saw was, kind of either hospitality or people kind of fishing, farming, doing other things. The idea of tech wasn't even kind of like in my mindset. And, in high school, when other people typed their papers, I hand wrote my papers. And I gave it to my mom because I literally didn't have a computer, didn't do anything with tech at all. And the way I got into it was when I went to college. I went to a college that it was very an emotionally challenging decision for my mother, because she did not want me to go there. And she said, if you go there, I'm not paying for you and you're not going to have a place to live. And so I got into tech because I was forced to get a job. And so I ended up going to college. The job that, made the most money for me was in IT consulting at the time. So I learned as much as I could to actually get a job and do work there. And so I was classics. That was my passion. That was my love, Latin and Greek. This kind of like IT thing was just a way to pay the bills.
Okay, well, thank you all so much. Our moderator is having some technical difficulties, so I'm going to start with asking the first question, and whoever wants to respond, sing out. So the first question is, did you have a mentor or any connections who helped or guided you along the way?
So I'm happy to chime in. Or Al, did you want to go?
Oh, please do, Carmen.
Okay. So yeah, I think if we're lucky, we have several mentors along our journey in space and time. So I've been very lucky to have great mentors. I will say that the majority of my mentors were white, save for my dissertation advisor, which made a huge impact on me as well, because he thought there weren't very many Black people in my doctoral program. So he sought us out, and that actually meant the world to me. That was really great that he did that. But I have to say that, it's not also important to have someone that guides you on your way, which is, what a mentor does. But, having someone who makes sure that you're in the right rooms, make sure, and one of my mentors has said this, or a sponsor, as you say, that's the difference between someone putting you out there and being an ally for you. But it's not enough to have a seat at the table. We also to make sure that you have a place setting at that table, right? So that you're going to eat too, and they were expecting you to be there, right? So I think it's been amazing for me to have these wonderful people in my life, and making sure that if I'm not in the room, that they're talking about the things that I'm doing, which can be really difficult when, you're also not as effusive, or, and you're not in those rooms. So having someone to say, oh, Carmen did that work and she's doing some great things with this, you should probably contact her about that. And I've had that, and I've been very lucky to have those amazing people, specifically at UCSC as well. My former supervisor was one of those people. She always makes sure that I can be on a committee. If she can put me in there, she's going to make sure I'm on it. And I really appreciate that. So it is so important to have people in your corner in different facets of your life. So if you're lucky, you'll have at least 100 mentors or sponsors in your life. But that's been very helpful for me to get into different rooms.
I think that was an awesome answer, Carmen. And I just wanted to chime in. Van kind of mentioned in the first question, but I mentioned as well, I'm an HR person by trade, so I could be doing HR work for any organization, doing anything. but Van was a big reason that I wanted to join ITS specifically because as you mentioned, at that point in my career, all of the mentors that I had were white, and I never had the opportunity to even like adjacently work for someone who looked like me. And that representation was important to me, and I wanted to work, although it wasn't for him directly, kind of the things that you were saying, Carmen, that he had me at the table at meetings, and even the fact that he created an HR position in ITS where they didn't have one for a long time. And so those things are really important, and I don't know if another leader would have had that same mentality. And it's not that it's just me and Van or something like that, but I do think it was eye-opening to me, as Van mentioned, that it wasn't really in my, like, working in tech wasn't in my line of vision because no one that looked like me worked in tech. And so seeing Van in a position of authority made it seem achievable to me. And so I went for it. And so that kind of informal mentorship definitely helped guide me.
I love both the answers, and I love the fact that Carmen, talked about it from mentorship, and she talked about it from sponsorship. And I love, Al, you talking about, what was achievable, as well. For me, like Carmen, most of my mentors, certainly basically in my youth, were white. They were actually usually white women, right? But I had the advantage of also kind of having some models, and those models came to me in my professional career. And there was a person by the name of Peter Henry, who was the dean of NYU's business school, former Stanford faculty member, served on President Obama's transition team, Rhodes Scholar, kind of like UNC slam dunk champion. I mean, just like this incredibly impressive person. That for me, I hadn't had a model that was kind of like salient, right? That was like right there that I could look at and I could say, oh my goodness, like, this person is doing so much, right? And every barrier in terms of what I thought was achievable just kind of exploded, right? It was like the sky was kind of the limit. If this person could kind of go out there and do this, right? There's nothing that I couldn't do. So I think for me, I just want to kind of recap by saying, I think the mentorship is huge. I think being mentored and being sponsored by people that don't look like you is actually a total advantage, But I also kind of don't want to underestimate the importance of just having models in your life that you can kind of see that can kind of inspire you.
Sorry for the technical difficulties, but I'm back now. And on to question number 3. What advice do you wish you got when you were first starting out in your career? Al or Sharon, either of you?
I'm happy to jump in again.
Okay.
I really appreciate this question because it got me thinking a lot about, because I don't often think about like, well, what's that piece of advice you wish you had? And I really thought about, one, the pressure that I think many, if not every Black professional in a workspace has felt, like the pressure to perform, the pressure to do a knock it out of the park, excellent job on everything you touch, because if somebody has a negative interaction with you or you do a bad job or whatever happens, it's, the fear, rational or not, that maybe this organization will remember that, oh, well, we had that Al way back when, and, we're not going to hire any Black people because Al didn't do a great job or something like that. And that's some pressure that I was not anticipating before working in the professional world. And I do feel that I kind of likely would have been like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, kind of, I needed to experience it for myself. People could have told me and probably did tell me, but I really had to experience it for myself. And so that, coupled with the isolation, I think partially of the nature of my role, being an HR manager, sometimes you're dealing with things that you can't really talk about, but also being, at UC Santa Cruz, a primarily white institution, there's the secondary isolation of also being, that one Black person or maybe, handful of people of color that work in your department or division. those are things that I did not anticipate, and I would have appreciated a heads up beforehand.
Yeah, that pressure and that isolation can be, can really break you down, especially if you don't have, to what Van was saying, like people you can look to and sponsors and mentors to kind of help you through that. I think to add on to that, for me, what I wish someone had told me was, or given me some guidance on when I came into tech, was kind of how to maintain who I was, and not to fold to the pressure of, you have to present a certain way, you have to talk a certain way, you have to look a certain way in order to be successful in your career. Because I think when you're Black and you come into these predominantly white spaces, there is a definite push to be something that you aren't. And that is a pressure in and of itself to maintain this idea of what people think you should be in order to be successful. And especially because a lot of those standards were created with a lack of diversity and inclusion in mind. And it's one of the things that I'm very vocal about. I want young Black women to see me being who I am, regardless of at what level I am functioning, so that they know that it doesn't matter. It really is about your skills. It is about the thought that you bring, the good that you bring to the organization and the people around you, and really like push that message, so that the message of you have to not show up fully, if that's your choice, in order to be successful, kind of gets drowned out.
What has been your experience working in tech as a Black person? Have you faced challenges, adversity? Did you overcome them? If so, how?
I was trying to find the unmute. But for this one, of course, there are always, there's, pick one kind of for, what are the challenges and the things that you've experienced working in tech as a Black person. But, I think it's the biggest one for me, especially being an earlier career professional, is, the difficulty in feeling competent and confident in your abilities and your know-how, but also without being seen as like arrogant or angry or dismissive or things like that. And it has been a very careful balancing act. Pretty much every interaction that I go into, I have to I have to think about what does my body language say? Like, am I coming off as aggressive in this? And, it is a little different now that we're all in this remote space, but, a lot of those things do still apply. So it has been difficult, but it's definitely not impossible, but it's a daily kind of struggle to, feel like I fit in the tech space.
I can chime in. I think for me, some of the challenges, especially when I started out, they were kind of, in a very deep basic needs mode, right? So, when I got to college and I was starting to work, my first several months in college, I was homeless. Right, I was sleeping in the library basement, and people were kind of like squirreling food away, so that I could eat. That by itself was an interesting challenge, and what I found is that both from a work ethic perspective and certainly basically from an educational perspective, there were a lot of people that I met. Because the school, just happened to be one that was very expensive. And so a lot of folks came there that was wealthy. We had people that were attending school for two different reasons. One set of people were attending school to try to succeed, right? And that success meant, kind of a better life for themselves, a better life for their family, right? And then there were other people who were attending school and they were attending school not to fail, right? And, they were already kind of successful. Right, the families were successful, they were lucky, right? And it was just, hey, look, we need to kind of get a degree because that's what you kind of do so that you're not a failure in your life. And I think that those two things, there's a lot of psychic weight that gets placed on somebody when you're especially when you're starting out and you're working hard in order to kind of be successful. All right. And I think that weight is not the same set of weight when you're kind of just there not to fail. And I also just needed a reason to use the term psychic weight.
I'll just throw in just I think maybe a special, struggle or something that Black women specifically face, especially Black women as they move up and move into leadership. And something that I struggled with was kind of the minimizing of what you bring to the table. And sometimes also by like osmosis, the minimizing then of the teams that you lead and their import. And so that's something that was a challenge for me early on because I couldn't quite understand why, though I was leading initiatives and things that were very high visibility and important, wasn't quite figuring out how to get the recognition for that and the support that the teams then needed to do that, or they were kind of being minimized as well. And so I kind of shout out to the sponsors and the mentors. I had the pleasure of working with Molly Greek, who's currently the CIO at the Office of President, and really able to learn from her kind of how to spotlight things and how to change the narrative around who I was as a leader and what my teams were bringing to the table, by watching how she did it, by, connecting with her and just getting that mentorship. And so I think that's something that Black women specifically kind of deal with and have to figure out how to kind of navigate that space and to Al's point, not come across as angry or, just always ready for battle, but also, just championing themselves and championing their teams.
Janae, can I just say, I think, that last point there is really kind of important. I really do feel like, kind of now having, been around the block enough, there is something special about being a woman and being Black. That's an extra special challenge. And I think it's kind of like really important to kind of call out that particular intersectionality, presents a set of challenges. And as a result, a need for a special set of support that's very different than being Black and being male.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that. Okay, moving on to our next question. What are the set of unique skills you've had to develop as a Black leader?
So I can say that there are some different things that you learn. I mean, I think one important piece for me is empowering my staff and helping them understand that I am here to support them and they're not, I work for them and that's the way it works. However, I can help them move along and just bringing others along. And then as we just talked about, navigating that space between being assertive and the angry Black woman. And I can say that you have to grow a thick skin because I've been called things, I've seen people not, they weren't intending to send an email to me and they're talking about me using racially coded words. So there are all kinds of things and they'll do it to your face too, and be extremely, as we talked about, as being a Black woman, just infantilizing as if, I have not worked to have that experience or I don't have the knowledge into it. So, I think that those are probably the biggest pieces. It's just, it's unfortunate, but just learning to have the thick skin, but learning when to assert what you need and what you need to take care of at that time. So I think those are big ones for me.
I can weigh in on this one as well. I think mine, goes into 3 buckets. One is humor. The second one is humility. And then the third one is storytelling. And, I think there is something about, from a leadership perspective, the ability to kind of have some humor that is disarming, even for critics, even for folks that may have some level of, bias, that helps you to kind of, be human, right? It helps you to kind of be relatable, and there's a connection. I think developing that, has been something that has been really, really useful for me. I think, as I mentioned, I started out mostly in a population that was kind of primarily Black, and as a result of it, I didn't have as much of an imposter syndrome as a lot of folks that have grown up in this country end up having, because they're not growing up in that environment. I kind of had like, a different problem. I just had a level of arrogance that was kind of like out the window. Right. And like I needed to really kind of temper that, because being Black and being arrogant, right, that is two things where, you end up building enemies very, very, very quickly. Everybody wants to kind of take you down. Right. And so for me, being able to kind of actually develop and really kind of internalize a sense of humility, right, and a sense that like you actually need everybody to kind of like, to be successful. Like it's not, you're not successful by yourself, right? Some of that's kind of youth as well, right? Like you're successful in the form of a team. And I think the final one, one of my colleagues who, I don't see here at UCSC, but, one of Al's folks, Laura Person, when I was there, I think either my first or second year, she said to me, Van, like I see you like to tell your answers and stories, right? And in fact, I do. Right. And it is intentional. It's purposeful. It's something that I've also kind of really invested a lot of time and energy in learning how to do, because when you tell a story, we're right back to kind of the fireplace back in tribal times, right? All sitting around the fire, right? And we're kind of hearing these stories in a way that our kind of brains respond to. And it is very, very different, for me to go out there and tell a story than to go out there and explain something in technical terms. Right. And so I think that's kind of another area that, I've really kind of had to invest in developing the skill sets for.
And Van, you kind of touched on this next question a little bit, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Has anyone ever experienced imposter syndrome? If so, how did you overcome it, or how do you cope with it?
I was really excited for this question because my answer is absolutely yes. Currently, right now on this panel, I am experiencing imposter syndrome. It's, one of those things that when I got the email and, to join this panel, it was something that I didn't think of myself as a Black leader in the UC system. And so it was very surprising to me to even think about it. And like, I guess I am. And people do think of me and want to hear the thoughts that I have and what my experiences have been. So I will say, just to answer that question, yes, it's also a constant thing. It's something, I grew up in the suburbs of Michigan, went to a farm school. I love my alma mater, but it's a small school in the middle of Michigan. And, now live in Santa Cruz, which is also, not the most diverse space. So I'm used to it, but also, it's one of those things that it never kind of goes away. So I'm grateful that I've built the skill set to be able to manage and code switch and do all those other things that one needs to do. But yeah, it's something that I don't think will ever go away.
Yeah, I just have to agree with Al. I mean, it's one of those things that I feel like I experience every day. You have to, the way to cope with it, because I think that there's no way to rid yourself of that imposter syndrome, but just telling yourself that you're good enough, and that, like, reminding yourself that we are all capable of learning new things. So maybe you don't know it today, but you can know it in a week, right? And making sure that you know that you can learn new things and be successful at those things. I think that's what's been helpful for me.
And I have to go back to kind of what Al said. I feel the same way about imposter syndrome, especially, organizing this panel, having all of you wonderful leaders here. And, when I first kind of was working on these questions, I was really, I'm still very excited to hear from leaders, but the thing I think for me is the most interesting in this panel is so many of the things I've thought and felt throughout my career and throughout my life, I'm hearing repeated back to me from you guys. And that's just definitely helping me feel a little, more at home, helping me fight that imposter syndrome. So again, thank you all for giving such wonderful, candid answers. But I'll move on to the next question. What should UC be doing to improve diversity at the leadership level? How do you measure success in this area?
So actually, Carmen, please.
Go ahead, Dan.
No, ladies first.
Okay. So I was just going to say that, creating clear pathways and trainings for leadership roles, I think would be really helpful. And I think that would be in most spaces, and just showing also role modeling. So you can see that there are people in those positions, and that also understanding the culture of different people. So, making the spaces not all white spaces that people have to conform to, but making people feel like there is space for them and have them feel like they've been seen, I think would be helpful.
I would say definitely +1 add on to like the legitimate pathways and, creating, whether it's like, a promotional promotional program or something like that, or, like formalizing the sponsorship, mentorship program or processes across the campuses, because I know there are a lot of affinity groups, like ABC identified or whatever your affinity group is. I know that a lot of us exist throughout the UC, but it'd be awesome to see, something more formal in terms of getting them to a pipeline for an executive leader role. So it's a long way of me saying I agree with you, Dr. Robinson.
So, I think one is institutionalization of more stuff, and we can talk about what the stuff is. And then the second one is the measurement of stuff. And then the third one is the reporting of stuff. And I kind of distinguish between measurement and reporting because I've seen organizations that measure stuff and they look at it on paper and they kind of put it into like a drawer somewhere, and they don't actually go out there and do much with it in terms of either reporting or talking about it. All right. And I think, when we're talking about the stuff, Al and Carmen have really kind of hit on it, right? I think some of it is sponsorship, mentorship. I think some of it is also kind of just, kind of like identifying that there's a need for processes within organizations that outlive people, right? That really are kind of dedicated towards supporting advancement in the diversification and the equity of organizations, right? I think when I look at, how we go and we measure right now, I don't see a whole lot of things that say, if you are a top level leader, how many people that don't look like you do you sponsor or how do you mentor? Right. I don't see that middle level leadership, as well. And I don't see it in the army of administrators and faculty that we have that we're actually doing anything in the way of supporting our students. Right. We should be measuring that. We should be doing it. We should be institutionalizing it. And then we should be telling the story to other people so that they kind of both know where we stand in our kind of commitment to this area. But they also kind of know that we're self-aware around how we're doing, and they can see, that we're not resting on our laurels and we're going out there and doing more to move this thing forward. Right. So I'm waiting for the day that somebody comes out there and they show me, hey, here's kind of what our retention rate is. Here's what our promotion rate is for Black women at the UC. Right. I'm waiting for the day somebody puts it on a website, right, and says, here's our goal about moving the needle on that, and here are the things that we're doing. Sorry, I'm going to rest my case.
Good answer. It's an excellent answer. Next question is, I already said that. How would you like to see Black History Month recognized in the future in tech and at UC?
I can chime in first on that one because I actually thought this was an interesting question, especially because we have, the observed holiday now that started, I believe last year was the first year. And so I kind of take this as an opportunity to kind of make a slight right turn and kind of go back to what Dan was saying. I think for me, rather than the focus on kind of what I think are ornamental or like the fluff of diversity, and really looking at where I would like us to focus on and see movement, real movement at the UC as it relates to the Black experience, some real targeted actions around the bias and the racism that is experienced across the system, some real targeted effort, like Dan said, on how we're including Black people in succession planning and making sure that they are prepared and ready and able to move into those leadership roles when they become available. Some targeted career development and pathway guidance for folks across the system. I'm all for a day off, but I think that there's some real systematic, deep needed changes that we really need to turn our attention to, and not just turn our attention to for a task force report, but actual items that we're going to see movement on, and then continued reporting and responsibility for making that movement and having it be for all of our UC campuses and all of our employees. So that's my non-answer to Black History Month.
I think it was a great answer. But I mean, I also think this was a fantastic question, and I thought a lot about it. And I think, there are a bunch of ways that we could recognize Black History Month in the workplace, especially now that we're remote. But I think it ultimately just comes down to, and this, what we're doing with UC Tech and starting to elevate voices is helpful. And I think that's part of what it comes down to, is just the UC putting its money where its mouth is, in terms of, we do all sorts of surveys for, campus engagement, but we could maybe do a more targeted survey of our employees of color, or, and as Van mentioned, we could measure it, but then what are we going to do with that once we measure it is the next step. And so I think it's all kind of like parts of the puzzle, but those are the things that I would like to see is, maybe more targeted outreach to the professionals. I know a lot of the affinity groups have gone, kind of quiet in recent years, but that's because there's been a global pandemic going on. So it's kind of understandable, but it would be awesome to see that, top level, executive level support and buy-in. And I mean, if you want, hey, here's your budget too. I'll take one. I would appreciate that too. But those are things that I would like to see.
Can I jump in here as well? I mean, first off, I think we need to kind of change it from Black History Month to being Black Future Month, right? The history is only kind of useful as far as basically where we want to kind of chart a path towards, right? And I think if we're kind of looking at it and framing it in that way, then now all of a sudden we become more goal oriented, right? And so, the question is, where's kind of the goals for supporting kind of brotherhood and sisterhood between Blacks and others, because we got to break that down. Right? Where are the goals that are actually focused on how we're going to do better at supporting and investing in our youth? It doesn't mean that you don't have to invest in terms of adults, but we know that basically the differences are outsized. Every dollar we spent kind of investing in the youth way outweighs the dollars that we kind of spent investing in an adult. Right? I think we also need to go out there and recognize that there's a lot of those social safety net things that actually make it possible to support our youth. Right? And if we can't support the parents that kind of need to do that work, right? Those kids, they're going to be at a disadvantage in a major way, and there's nothing you can do unless you're kind of supporting that household to kind of help with the kids. And then I think the final thing is just really about capital allocation. It's about money, right? And like, what are we going to be doing in terms of talking about and showing how we're actually allocating capital towards supporting Black excellence? It's training, it's development, but it's also kind of things like, entrepreneurship, And are we actually investing more into people that want to go out there and build businesses so we can get more models, so that we can kind of build organizations that really, are kind of changing the world, and that becomes self-reinforcing.
The next question is, how do we create a culture of inclusion in a remote work environment?
So I would just say creating space and holding space for people, and using technology to bring people together, and learning to be flexible, and being visionary when it comes to how you bring people together, and not thinking, okay, we can only do this with people who are face to face, but there are so many ways to utilize technology to bring everyone together.
I'd add that I think it's still an opportunity to look at culture. There's been a lot of research done about, people of color, women, and their slightly advanced desire to have remote options and to be remote. And a lot of that is based in their experiences when they were in office, and some of them not, good experiences. And so I think there's an opportunity there that just because you've shifted to remote and hybrid work, to also still look at what is your culture that is maybe driving some folks to want that option more, because they didn't feel like there was a safe space for them, and taking that opportunity to still do that culture improvement work, and not just trying to apply what you had to a remote, process. And then I also just want to put out there that there's also this idea of, inequity in remote work. A lot of our staff who are not eligible for remote work tend to be folks of color, maybe in some of the lower classified positions. And so thinking about that, and what does that say about our organization, that, the bulk of the folks who are going to get hit with having to be in person and maybe taking on more of the challenges and the risks, again, would be more of our people of color. And so really looking at that and seeing, okay, where are our opportunities to support them and come alongside them if they're not going to be able to take advantage of remote opportunities, and maybe even really looking at our organizational kind of norms on why some of those roles could not be remote, and trying to step outside of that box a little bit more, I think would be a good idea. And then one more thing, because we were talking about kind of moving into leadership, and those opportunities, and creating those pathways and those spaces for people, is to make sure that we aren't inequitably impacting folks who decide that they want to be remote, and then taking away those pathways for them to move into leadership because of that. I think those are my three things for remote work.
So I will just kind of react to something that Faye Snowden, Faye hopefully will get connected next time I'm at Berkeley, kind of brought up, which is, this question around, hey, we're talking about diversity from training and mentorship. What about promotion practices? All right, what about hiring practices? I kind of paraphrased her slightly. And I think that is really kind of important. So when we talk about that institutionalizing of stuff, I think Al knows, a lot of this is like, hey, look, when we do reclassifications, all right, how do we go out there and change the basic process to make that more equitable, right? At Santa Cruz, we have a committee, right? Al spends his time with this committee, and the committee isn't just IT people, or at least we used to. It's not just IT people, but it's IT people, and it's, HR people coming together and looking at it. We have the ability for not just the manager to put somebody up for reclass, but for a person to go and self-nominate themselves, right? That's kind of a fundamental process change that allows you to be more equitable. There are process changes in the way that we go out there and we recruit. right? Like, do we always go out there and look at a certain set of sites to kind of promote our jobs? And, or do we kind of just go to the mainstream sites, right? Do we offer training to our managers so that they kind of know how to target their jobs to make sure that they kind of remove themselves, not just removing bias, but actually kind of makes them bias in a way that has an appeal to a greater set of people, so that we know, if the job is presented as being aggressive, women aren't going to actually apply, right? So instead of basically kind of putting in that language, can we put in language that actually has an appeal for them to apply? So I think that, that institutionalization, it goes across the spectrum, right? Hiring, onboarding, career pathways that we provide, promotion, even to offboarding. If we have a small amount of Black people in our organization and they leave, right? Let's offboard them in a way where they can serve as mentors for other people coming in. They can serve as coaches, as guiding counselors. They don't have to kind of lose that relationship. They can serve as advocates. All right. So I think there's a lot of things that we can go out there and do to really kind of move the needle here, that would actually support having a much more inclusive and equitable environment. Sorry, I didn't touch about the remote work, but I think they're all actually kind of applicable, whether or not you're remote or you're in person.
Great. And our last question is, how do we make the UC Tech environment better for everybody?
Well, okay, I'll go with this one. I think, as I mentioned earlier, this panel is a good start. At least, for my awareness. I mentioned earlier how it can feel, pretty isolating, as an HR person, but also as a Black professional. And it's nice to see, we had, I think, almost 200 people on the call, and, it's really cool to see that there aren't, it can feel isolating, but knowing that there are 200 people that care and are, maybe like you mentioned, Janae, hearing things that they have themselves experienced. It's really nice to know that there are, hundreds of other people across the system that are having similar experiences to me that I can, maybe have a sounding board with, and maybe, create some more of those informal relationships. So I think that's a good start, but I'd like to see more, elevating more voices, different people of color, different genders, all that stuff. I think would be really helpful in just for all of the people that are feeling isolated to understand that and really see that they're not alone. I know it's been helpful for me.
I second that.
I just want to, say maybe two things on this one. One, I agree with Al. Doing events like these are a start, and I think it's not just because of the amount of melatonin that we see on the screen. I think it's also because of the fact that when I go out there and I look at the people that are attending, I see Pam Swaim, I see Rachel Nosowski, I see Nathan Johnson, I see a lot of people that are white that are coming out here, and they're doing this because they are fantastic allies. They're doing this because this actually is really important, right? And so it's not just the people that actually show up on screen, it's the people that actually come to the events and participate and engage and demonstrate to their colleagues that they're partners that care as well, right? And then I think the other one, is kind of very much in that space of the one ring to rule them all type mentality. I don't know what UC Tech is, but I know that it is not IT. Right. And when we go out there and we talk about making that UC Tech environment better for everybody, I want to make sure that we know that, I embrace Al as part of that UC Tech community. Right. I embrace Carmen as part of that UC Tech community. I embrace that one person hanging out and marketing, coding up their website as part of the UC Tech community, or the person in finance writing that report and crunching some numbers using Excel and some, more sophisticated Excel macros than I've ever seen, as being part of the UC Tech community. So for me, this question is really about how do we make the environment better for UC, right? And of course, it basically starts with conversation, right? Of course, it goes out there and it starts with us setting some goals for ourselves, right? But I think, the big thing is, look, we got to show up consistently, right? Even when we kind of feel like, hey, we've talked about this stuff ad nauseum, right? Let's talk about it some more. Let's talk about it until we all spew out the answers of second nature, right? And it's not an issue. Let's talk about it. So our kids basically see it so much that they never actually knew anything different, right? All they know is that this is the way the world should be. It's just, it's fair, it's equitable, right? And there is no difference.
Okay, we have time for just a couple questions from the Q&A. So the first one, this is to everybody. How can a non-Black person best be a supportive ally and help empower other Black colleagues?
I think it kind of goes back to what we talked about with being a sponsor, making sure that, you know, when a person creates an idea or creates something, you give them credit for it. You go to meetings and talk to people in spaces where you say, hey, Al did this awesome thing. Let me tell you about it. And I think this could actually work with what you're doing, right? Because Al's not always going to be in the room. So really sticking to making sure people know that person and giving them credit where credit is due, because a lot of times that does not happen. So I think that that's really helpful. But then also understanding that any person of color is coming into a predominantly white institution, and these are white spaces, right? So helping them feel validated in the work that they're doing is super important. So that would be my suggestion for ways to really support Black people and people of color.
Janae, one small tiny thing, and everything Carmen said I loved. This is going to be very tactical. I feel like, you know, the first couple weeks, first couple days, first couple months coming into a new organization, I think it's a critical time. I think it's a critical time for Black people, especially, or, you know, other people of color. And if you really are kind of looking for something small to do, you know, be really consistent about doing some outreach in those first couple days, those first couple weeks, and making people feel welcome, making them feel seen, you know, making them feel like, you know, you're kind of glad for them to kind of be there, because, you know, so much of our challenge now has kind of shifted around how do we recruit Black people, right, to how do we keep Black people.
And Van, I have a question that's kind of a follow-up to your question. Do you feel that Slack is a good place to have those conversations and create that connection with community?
I feel like I need somebody a lot smarter than me to kind of answer this question. You know, I just, you know, part of the problem that we have here, and I know Carmen and I were talking about this last week, which is there is really, no matter what, in terms of remote environments, still, you know, very deeply a need for face-to-face, right? You know, we kind of know, like, you know, how important breaking bread is, right? As much as telling those stories by the fire, but, like, you know, if you're telling the story and somebody's not feeding you some bread and some mead, right? You know, you're not going to basically be hanging out there very long. So I think that that's really important. I think it's really so much harder to kind of have very difficult conversations in written form than it is to kind of have it in a form where, even if we're kind of dealing with Zoom, but you can kind of see the emotion on my face, right? You can kind of hear the tenor of my voice. You can understand that sympathy, right? Or the empathy that we kind of have. And so I don't think that Slack is kind of not something that I would say, hey, you cannot use it. Of course you can, like we should be, right? I think what we kind of lose in, or what we gain in our ability to kind of have something that's very quick, very fast, very instantaneous, you know, what we kind of lose is the ability to have something that's kind of nuanced and that's kind of deep and that's intentional. So I think it's a part, but I don't think it's kind of inclusive.
And I would just add in, you know, just taking opportunities to kind of thread it through, you know, it doesn't have to be only one space where you're having these conversations, one, you know, scenario where you're having these conversations. You know, these things may come up in your day-to-day work life with a colleague. You know, take that opportunity to support them, to speak up on their behalf. Reach out, like Al said, there's tons of employee resource groups and different groups that are focusing on a lot of these subjects. Take an opportunity to figure out what you've got going on at your campuses, at the system-wide level and see where you can plug in and support and have the conversations and be a part of that, you know, in your personal lives. It's like it's a constant thread through. And then we use the technologies that we have to support that. And we use the face-to-face opportunities, like Van said, to support that. But I think it needs to be a thread through. It's not just, you know, when we have this 30-minute meeting or this 1-hour panel or this, you know, we had a Slack discussion. It is a thread, I think.
Ron, Al, Carmen, Van, thank you so much for joining this panel. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And I hope everybody has a wonderful Monday and enjoy the rest of Black History Month. Bye.
Thank you.